Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is ralfidude, and welcome to the very first podcast episode of Ralfi's Dark Alley. Today, I am joined by 4 members of a very well-known and well-renowned third-party development team. They are responsible for creating such modules as the MiG-21 and the Viggen, with an upcoming project that a very large portion of the community is waiting for, the F-14 Tomcat. I'm of course talking about Heatblur Simulations, and I will let these gentlemen introduce themselves and their roles, starting with Cobra.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas Dackard, also known as Cobra 847. I founded Heatblur, was a founding member of Leatherneck, and I serve as essentially, I guess, somewhat of the string that holds everything together, plus the lead artist of the team.
Hi, my name is Bert, aka Gyrovag. Americans seem to have a little bit of trouble pronouncing this sometimes, but it's still a lot easier than Gregor's Brzezinkiewicz. I'm an electronic engineer living in South Africa, and my main F-14 responsibilities are the weapons, heads-up display, vertical display indicator, detailed custom radar modeling, and the associated detailed data display and tactical information display, as well as the data link.
So basically, my name is Daniel. I am, or Swither is my nick, and basically I live here in Stockholm. My background is in mechatronics. I've basically done research in the field of autonomous driving and steer-by-wire systems. After that, I decided to basically change my career a bit. I went into data analytics, so that's what I do for my daytime job. And then every evening, basically, I work on building flight models for Heatblur. That's pretty much it. I guess I have the overall responsibility for the software design. I do a little bit of systems modeling as well, but I let Gyro and Groover and the other guys handle most of that.
My name's Nick Pernia. I'm on the forums as Blackline213, and I'm currently one of the F-14 testers, and then I've also invested a lot of time building campaign content, sort of writing the underlying storylines and doing some mission creation too.
Excellent. Thank you very much for taking some time off from your very busy schedule to join me today. Just so I can get this out of the way now, I need to ask one very important question that everyone wants to know. F-14, when?
Soon. 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
Well, I have to say that personally, it's always been a joy to work with you guys. Cobra has been a fantastic liaison between your company and the public. You can always see his head poking around and keeping up with the community whenever he can. But I've also noticed that you guys don't really overdo it too much. You seem to have found a nice balance of showing the public just enough to get them excited, but not so much where you guys go overboard. So for that and the fantastic work you've put out over the years, I think I can speak for the majority of the community when I say thank you. I also extend that thanks for being a competent development team and having earned our trust in the products that you guys produce. However, it hasn't been all ice cream and gumdrops. As is the case with most product development, there are always bumps on the road, and no company is truly immune from this. The largest amount of criticism from certain members of the community that I've found with your modules would be the MiG-21, though I would say that the majority of people were very happy with it, myself included. There were some comments from people who felt like the module was sometimes in a broken state after certain patches, or that some of the problems took far too long to be worked on. And then, all of a sudden, we received the news that you guys split up from Leatherneck and created a new company, Heatblur. The timing of this may just seem like a coincidence, but I do have to ask, what happened? Was it just a difference in opinion between members of your team, or was there something a little bit more sinister going on?
So out of the current Heatblur team, I was essentially the only one who worked on the MiG-21, and Leatherneck was built as a company that had a very flat structure. And while I was really the public face of the company in many ways, I really didn't have a directorial role on the MiG-21. That's not something that we perhaps, I won't say suffer from, but that's not a situation that we have today. Today we have a much more top-down approach so that we are never in that situation again where issues or bugs remain unsolved for a very long time, and there is a distribution of responsibility where there isn't really a clear line of management and a clear line of responsibility, and really end of the line, if you will, and a responsibility to get things fixed. For the MiG-21, I suppose some of the issues on that aircraft were a result of inexperience, as well as differing design philosophies and development philosophies, I would say. Today, I think we have much more crossover between our different teams. Back then, the Viggen and the F4 team were completely separate from the MiG-21 team, but Heatblur today looks very much different. So we're really trying to avoid the same types of pitfalls that we did with the MiG-21. In terms of why the split happened, I won't really go into detail, but I don't think it was anything sinister in particular. I think it was really just a accumulation of differences of opinions, and eventually, a few years down the line, if it looks like both entities going their separate ways is the better path forward, that was what we had to do.
All right, excellent. That's good to hear, and I think you guys have definitely shown that with the Viggen being the Heatblur version of your next project, and it was definitely a lot more cohesive in comparison to the MiG-21.
I guess you could also add that with the MiG-21, it really was the first proper third-party module. I never worked in it myself, but of course that it's really first in many ways for DCS, and that of course comes with its issues as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that just needs to be figured out from scratch, both from ED's side and from the Leatherneck side, and so on, and things that needs to be reworked and so on. And in terms of the split, I guess it's at some point, like Nick said, I mean, when you have if you have two basically separate teams under the same entity but working with totally different projects, it doesn't really make that much sense to stay the same entity. At least that's my 2 cents of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely understandable, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, in the lead up to the publishing of the MiG-21, we certainly had a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we needed to figure out. Maybe not even strictly in a developmental sense, but there were also a lot of distribution and just process things that were unclear on both our side and on ED's side, right? It was a learning experience for them as well as the first really real third-party release. So it was really a big hurdle to jump, and gave everybody a lot of well-needed experience. Of course, optimally, the MiG-21 would have been kept in a pristine state throughout its beta stages and so on. But I have a lot of confidence in my former partners at Magnitude 3 to make sure the MiG-21 is as good as it can be, and I have full confidence in that they can get it done. So,
I mean, for the first module that you guys ever released, I honestly think you guys did a fantastic job. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names right now, but I mean, there have been other third-party developers who have not fared anywhere near as well as you guys have. So for that, well done. And you've certainly improved since then, and I can't wait until what happens with your future projects as well. So a little while ago, I made a Facebook post asking the community to come up with some questions that they would like you to answer. Now, I've taken the best ones and refined them to something more coherent because, guys, some of the questions you asked were just, ugh. I honestly don't know how you deal with this on a daily basis, Cobra. First off, a little background information on you gentlemen. How did you all come to know each other and decide on becoming a new team?
I guess it's a matter of, all of us except Nick joined after Leatherneck was already a thing, and after the MiG-21 was already out. From my point of view, I've been with Heatblur or Leatherneck for a little bit more than 3 years, I guess, and I really just want to get into. I just wanted to work with flight sims somehow, so I got in touch with Nick and asked if I could lend my services.
Yeah, well, as mentioned previously, I was sort of in a leading position, really leading the team at Leatherneck and the organization for quite a long time. And I essentially started bringing people in starting with the Viggen team, which started as a community mod team, which we brought in under the Leatherneck banner in order to assist with the development and really bring that aircraft to the market. I think at some point in 2015, Daniel wrote me, and he was brought on board to take the lead on the F-14 flight modeling. And since then, I guess we've just really been hiring people, expanding as we go along, especially when some excellent prime talent comes along. That's when we really try to pounce on the opportunity. Bert here joined us in late 2016, I think it was, after we put out an ad for new engineering staff. And Nick, we've known Nick for a very long time, I think. Met you in California, Nick, but I'm not sure, I guess, when you can say you really joined, but we've been in touch for quite a while, I think. So that's it. I guess it's just sort of organic growth driven by, by people seeing quality results, and thus I guess we attract some great talent. And I think it's important for us to build a team on really great talent and credentialed individuals, which I think we've been very successful with so far.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that the Viggen was a community open project. But was it an open project? Were people outside involved in any way, or how did that come about?
No, it was actually a Swedish squadron which decided to make a module. I'm not sure how they came to the decision exactly. Spur of the moment thing, perhaps. And Christopher, the lead Viggen engineer, he did a great job for many years. And at that point, they got in touch with us, and we started talking, and it was really a match made in heaven, I would say, in terms of where they were and where we were, and how we could assist with the development. And it really, became a mainline Leatherneck product at that point. Again, though, of course, the MiG-21 team did not work on the Viggen, but instead we sort of built a new sub-team within Leatherneck for the Viggen, which is today a sub-team within Heatblur, working on the Viggen and some other new aircraft.
Is Heatblur a full-time job, or is it just a side job for you guys? Because I imagine the amount of time and work that it takes can't leave you with much, spare time.
I guess it's a mix. I think we're actually starting to, perhaps soon, I haven't done the count recently, but we're getting close to having more full-time employees than part-time people, at least for the core team. But I guess I can speak for everybody when I say that, regardless of whether this is a full-time thing for us or a side thing for us, we all consider it a job, and a very serious one at that. So I think a lot of people and companies try to bring that up as an excuse, like as in, this is basically a hobby or a side thing. But right. I don't think that's couldn't be further from the truth for us, at least. The moment you take people's money, it stops being a hobby and really becomes a business, a professional business. So
exactly.
I think with that comes some very important responsibilities. I can't speak for Daniel or Bert in terms of hours or so, but I think they both consider it to be up there, and they're investing a lot of time.
Yeah, I haven't counted, but I'm working on the F-14 for at least 3 years now, so I would say I'm quite committed to this project.
True that.
Yeah, I think I've been here for a year and a half or so at this point, and lots of overtime and weekends and long nights and so on. But it's super worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a lot of. I mean, a big part of it is just really getting a chance to really dive, dig into these, treasure troves of fantastic documents made by NASA and by, the Navy, and like just learning so much about the systems and the aircraft and how these things work and so on. It's just amazing fun, and just seeing the community reactions, and the Viggen, and to the stuff we post about the Tomcat and so on. It's amazing. It's super fun.
Yeah, it's really incredible reading about some of the stuff that these guys made. Like before I was born, even they had really clever stuff that they made 40, 50 years ago. It's actually really interesting reading about that stuff.
Yeah, I think in many ways, it's almost like a dream job in a way, in the sense that you get to combine one of your favorite hobbies and aviation and create something that people really are looking forward to. I've been in some creative industries where you're working on things for months and months, and a handful of people end up looking at it or seeing it, and that's obviously not even close to as rewarding as building probably one of the most iconic aircraft of all time, for a community which you really identify with. So that's super cool.
Plus, you get to build stuff that can fly and shoot and not kill real people.
There's that too, yeah. So, is there a specific way that you come up with what plane you want to work on? I would assume it has a lot to do with what you personally like, what the community would like, and what is actually accessible to you in terms of documentation. Or do you just have a wall filled with pictures of planes and you just throw darts to figure out what to work on next?
Darts.
I guess, yeah, darts. I mean, I wish it was purely based on personal wishes, but I think today we try to look at it more as a combination of market appeal and feasibility. It's always really a balance, and there's so many factors that come into play. A less popular aircraft might be feasible and have enough market appeal if it's simple enough, for example. So there's a lot of factors at play, and of course, personal wishes combine into that and influence the outcome as well. Obviously, with some of the tech that we've been working on, like Jester AI and the ground radar, those influence our choices greatly as well. So, of course, we're looking very heavily at things like multi-crew aircraft and other things that leverage our custom technologies, if you will.
Yeah, and of course, we also don't have a completely free choice. I mean, it depends what EDA would allow us to make and so on as well.
So they do have the final say in the end.
Yeah, of course, every aircraft needs to have a valid license agreement with Eagle Dynamics. So,
Gotcha.
of course, we communicate regularly with them, so we don't spend years developing an aircraft, which
Right.
we can't. But it's definitely something that we need to account for as well, of course.
Yeah, I mean, also I'd like to add about the, how we decide about which aircraft to go for and so on. I mean, there has to be some kind of commercial viability in the choices we make. But to be honest, the market is not huge, I think, and the amount of time you have to spend. If you want to spend every amount of free time you have for 3 years working on something like this, you have to kind of like what you're doing. So I mean, you have to have some kind of interest in the actual plane you're making as well. Otherwise, it would never work. I think Viggen is a great example of a project which is, I mean, it's a niche aircraft, right? I mean, it's amazing in every way, but it doesn't. I mean, it will never have the same reach as the Tomcat will, for instance. But it's just so fun for us to make, especially since a lot of us are Swedes, right?
Speaking of time, in general, I've heard that it takes around 3 years to fully produce a full fidelity module. Could you briefly, and I mean briefly, because I'm sure you guys can go into great detail here, walk us through the steps of how you go about it, and how do you acquire the necessary documentation and artwork to develop the plane?
I think it's a lot about research and iterations. Like the amount of documents and so on you need for an aircraft if you want to do it properly. I mean, it's insane. You need to have everything from aerodynamics data to system, like in-depth system descriptions and so on. And I think for the Tomcat, we've been able to acquire a really good amount of data over the years, but it's like some of the data we have on the systems and so on, we only acquired like the last 12 months or so, which and that data has totally opened it's opened up a new world for us and so on in terms of systems modeling and so on. So I think it just takes time to find the documents. You find them on eBay or find that person in this group of collectors or whatever that actually has that document and is willing to help us and so on. Then also like NASA has an amazing technical report archive which contains a lot of good data. And then of course, using subject matter experts. I think with F-14 we've been really lucky to have a couple of pilots and Rios that are really into helping us, and they are willing to test the module on a weekly basis and give us direct feedback. It's just amazing. I think the Tomcat will be a new level of fidelity for ECS, to be honest. It would surprise me if not.
One sort of almost a bottleneck, if you will, of the development process in terms of the systems modeling, at least, is just the sheer amount of documentation. There's thousands of pages of documentation, and you need to read the things and understand them, and often the data ops and those sort of things aren't very clear, or they're even contradictory and so on. So it's just a huge amount of information which you need to essentially distill into something that you can in the end code. So that's from the systems point of view.
I was going to say that as someone who's really, basically a community member who was invited because I'm a Tomcat nerd, so I learned a lot about it starting as a kid. It was absolutely astounding to see how much information is needed to actually construct every single part of this. I mean, it's 20 times more than I ever would have imagined in terms of what kind of documentation you need, the level of detail. I mean, I think the most irritating thing I see on the forums these days where someone says, "Oh, I found the manual, so therefore this is buildable." And it's like, that's maybe 5 to 10% of the information you really need to construct this. I mean, it's unbelievable how complex the programming is and the level of detail built into the FM. It's shocking.
From a strictly developmental point of view, developing an airplane perhaps is, much like developing any other piece of software. It can be complex, but I guess on the whole, it's not the most complex piece of software in the world. But when you combine it with the fact that you need to first, do months of research and thousands of hours of distilling that information into implementable concrete features, that's where the difficulty really comes in. But in terms of just the development process in general, I would say that the art process, at least, is for us fairly straightforward, but we're also breaking a lot of new ground with the F-14 because we've really delved into the realms of photogrammetric and laser scanning and things like this, and we've hand sculpted each and every part of the airplane and so on. So it's been a more convoluted process this time around, but on a whole, it's fairly straightforward, and we've been at it for years now, really. So I think we've got it down to a T for the most part.
So what would you say was the most valuable resource in developing a module? And furthermore, is there something that you didn't have access to that you guys wish that you did?
There's always more data, right?
I guess one of the big things is having access to the real aircraft, at least from my point of view, from the artistic point of view, was a very valuable thing to have. And another thing would be our own experience, because this is really our third time around the DCS rodeo, if you will. Much more if you count in past experiences from other simulation engines like FSX. But I think we know what happens at every step of the way now of development. So we drawing upon that and really being able to take more time to improve our process and make a better product has been a massive benefit to the F-14.
It definitely shows, that's for sure.
I think also, in terms of most valuable resources, I mean, except for the very talented team we have, I mean, with super diverse skill sets, but everything from surgeons to software engineers to electrical engineers to artists, right? But I think, like I mentioned before briefly, the subject matter experts have been immensely valuable for us in the F-14 project, especially. We've been working with pilots in our previous airplanes as well, and I know in the MiG-21, Dolphin, he's a MiG-21 pilot himself. But I think in the F-14 we really took the feedback rounds and really working with the SMEs to a whole nother level, at least from my point of view.
So let's move on to your newest upcoming baby, the F-14 Tomcat. Personally, I'm absolutely thrilled that you've made this choice. I'm pretty sure that it was inevitable that someone would take on this project, but I am very glad that you guys decided to undertake this task. I have a feeling that this was a different type of project than the previous two that you've undertaken. Going from a delta wing of a Viggen to a variable sweep wing design of a Tomcat must have been a challenge. And not only have you chosen to develop such an iconic aircraft, but you also went well above everyone's expectations when you announced that the Rio in the back would be a fully functional AI that reacts realistically. From what we've seen so far, Jester is not just another annoying AI, but can be regarded as an essential tool for your success when you don't have a human Rio in the back. So how did you come up with that idea, and how on earth were you able to actually code that into DCS?
The idea was initially to really for two things. Like, first thing is, of course, functionality, because the Rio in the F-14 serves in a very critical role as the operator of the radar and various other systems. But the other component was immersion, of course. Even playing Fleet Defender back in the day, the addition of the immersive aspect of having someone there in the back seat talking to you and reacting to what you're doing is a very big part of the F-14 experience, I think. So that was a big part of our announcement and our thoughts behind Jester and when we came up with it. In terms of detail, I guess I'll hand off to Daniel because he is the Jester master, if you will.
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of like details and being able to implement it in DCS and so on, I think, to be honest, the DCS SDK itself, it allows us to do, I mean, if we can write it in code, we can do it pretty much. The limitations are rather in the sense of like what data can we get out of the sim and so on. But Jester really only needs to know the things that the player would need to be able to know anyway, right? Since he is supposed to mimic a human being. So we can get the positions of the other aircraft and these kind of things out of the engine. So in terms of implementing it, it's not there's not really any problems like that. I think the main issue is like just figuring out how to make everything work in a very natural way. We don't want super complex, menus. We have to do like select 10 different options to make him do the right thing. You don't want him to really be just an arm extension or something to be able to reach the rear buttons, right? So we've been working a lot with creating contextual menus and so on, like where you can, like if you're in a dogfight, there will be like a quick radial menu where you can select the interactions that are useful in this situation and so on. But I mean, it's a work in progress, and like we're not like 100% happy with the current solution. I mean, we're getting there, but there's still more work to do. I would say that the current focus is really to make the really basic functionality feel natural and really be really smooth, and then we'll take it from there and add a lot of things that we really want to get in there. We have a lot of really cool plans for Jester, but in the beginning, it will be somewhat limited for early access. I mean,
yeah, I think it's important to temper everybody's expectations a little bit because we're really focusing on just getting that base functionality as good and natural as we can get it. And I guess the biggest thing for us is that it's been a big learning process, and it's not really only been creating an AI system that reacts naturally and works well in the game, but we've had to create a whole voice layer on top of it, if you will. So to have Jester speaking to the player in a natural way and everything that comes with that, which I think we're up to 4,000 pre-recorded voice lines and snippets, which all have to come together in a natural way and really work. And it's been a really long learning process, and we're actually going back and redoing some of those early voice lines that we did earlier on, simply because we didn't know better at the time. And now that we've got more experience in building this AI, we can now go back and really try and improve on what we've done before. So it's really been a big learning process, and it's going to be fairly basic and simple in the beginning. But I think as Daniel said, as we go along, we're going to expand its functionality, and that's also going to open the doors to other multi-crew aircraft that we're planning, and we're going to be able to port Jester more readily, and it's going to have more functions available from the get-go.
I think one crucial thing which people maybe need to understand as well is that the Jester interacts with all of the buttons in the rear cockpit. He programmatically presses buttons and throws switches and so on. And this is important for two reasons. One is that he actually takes the time to move his head towards the correct direction of a button before he throws it. And secondly, if a player Rio were to join the cockpit would be in the state that the Rio had left it in, so you wouldn't just have random positions of all the switches, etc.
That's really cool.
And I have to say, as someone who flies it all the time, it's quite functional now. I mean, you don't ever have to jump into the backseat to do anything. So it's very effective for gameplay, even if it will become more refined with time.
Now, did you guys outsource for the voice of Jester, or is he part of the team?
It's Grayson Froberg, who's done an excellent job, and he's been recording all of Jester's voice lines, and we've been using one of our team members, Alex, and he's been directing Grayson together, and they've I believe we're going to do a video update on their recording process, because in order to have it as natural as we possibly can, they've actually been taking up the aircraft and running missions and trying to record the voice lines in natural DCS situations to try and get that correct intonation and so on. We've put a lot of effort into, not only recording one variation of each voice line, but some of the most common ones will have up to 100 different variations of the exact same phrase. So with some luck, it'll feel really natural, and you won't hear the same, you won't hear the same Roger or copy 2 times in a row, but it's going to feel really natural and good. So, anyone worrying about arminess, if you will hopefully have their fears dispelled. But that's one of the big focus areas right now, because it's a really tricky thing to tackle.
Now, is Jester going to be available upon launch, or do you expect that you'll need some more time to finalize him? And additionally, is multi-crew going to be working on launch as well?
Yes.
Yes and yes. Yeah, so Jester is going to be available on launch. As mentioned before, it's definitely going to be pretty bare bones. We're only going to launch it with the stuff that we feel is solid and reliable and natural. The ultimate goal is to have the F-14 be fully combat capable at launch with Jester. As Nick said, I think we're getting close to that point right now, but we don't want to launch it in a state where you're going to struggle to use Jester in a single-player mission.
Right.
In terms of multi-crew, I think it's really woven into our development process. So everything that we implement, every feature that we create, we ensure that it is fully multi-crew capable right from the get-go. And of course, we've built a whole new sync layer for front and rear cockpits and all these types of things to make the F-14 multi-crew experience as good and smooth as we possibly can. And I think Bert and Daniel have done a really good job on that. So actually, in extension, super proud of what they've done, but obviously I can't take credit, unfortunately.
Now, there was a lot of interest in finding out the true capabilities of Jester, and we've gotten a peek at some of the things that he's able to do. Primarily, he's not going to behave like an all-knowing AI and will only call out what he actually physically sees. And I know you've touched on this briefly a little while ago, but is Jester going to be also helpful in the middle of a dogfight, for instance? If you get a bandit on your 6, does he help you at all in that situation?
Yes, he tells you where they are. He usually punches out chaff, and just queuing to where the bandit is actually very helpful when you're doing WVR stuff.
So it's the Rio's job in the back to actually work the countermeasures. Can the pilot in the front switch and do that himself, or is it going to be primarily the guy in the back?
But chaff is usually the Rio's job.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, the Rio can program all the countermeasure programs and all that kind of stuff, and he can kind of set one thing that the pilot can do. So the pilot's got like a single sort of release button, and what that does gets determined by the Rio. But the Rio's got far more control over those countermeasures.
Now, is it possible to render Jester unconscious from, let's say, pulling too many Gs? And I also assume that he has his own hitbox, so he could be killed with you still being alive in the front, right?
I mean, the idea is to make Jester as human as possible. I mean, we want him to have the same limitations as the human player would be. So right now, he is not, he can't G-lock, for instance, but that's something we intend to add before early access.
We, of course, are going to add his hitbox as well. The functionality to make him disabled is implemented, so that will be tied in together with the damage model as well. So that's absolutely something that we're looking at.
And are there any other fun little things you guys would like to share about Jester?
He really likes Meg.
All right. We obviously expect the closest thing to realism with these modules. That's the whole point behind the DCS level aircraft. However, besides some of the classified information, where you have no real reference to pull from and have to come up with your own version of things, is there anything that has to be changed or tweaked to make it balanced?
I don't think we've come into a situation like that with the F-14 yet. I think the closest that we've gotten has been the HUD and people asking for a smooth HUD.
Oh my God, the HUD.
Which in the F-14, I guess, isn't actually. I mean, it's a concession on realism if we do add it, but on the other hand, it doesn't really afford any extra combat capability, I'd say, since the weapons mode are pretty accurate anyways. I think Bert might disagree with me, unless if I'm wrong. At least that's what I can remember. So I think that's the closest we've gotten. But I think as a general policy in Heatblur, I think we always try to stay away from that kind of thing. Obviously, there are times where you have to do it simply due to the fact that our computers, PC screens and interfaces, like input interfaces, are not the same as the real aircraft. But I don't think we've really done anything like that on the Tomcat.
I mean, I don't see a reason why we should like artificially limit our fidelity. If it's something we can do, we should make it as close to the real thing as possible. I mean, balancing and these kind of issues should really be up to the mission designer, in my point of view.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't expect that from the module itself. But, people sometimes think about things like the radar warning receiver. There's a lot of classified information there, and sometimes developers need to kind of make up their own version of things because they still want it to be functional, but, realism needs to pop its head in there somewhere and be like, yeah, well, we don't really know because it's classified.
I guess there's a big difference between truncating realism for the sake of balance and for the sake of gameplay versus having to try and figure out how something works based on limited data. I guess there's a big difference in simply intention there. And I guess we will be guilty of the latter because you're always going to have to abstract away some of the deep functionality of things. We don't simulate every wire or avionics cable in the cockpit, but we do simulate the interface and the avionics component itself. But we don't ever go in with the intent to strip away realism for any reason, really.
Yeah, I've actually previously kind of thought guys that made these simulations in the past, like Fleet Defender and so on, I actually think it's kind of in a way a more difficult job to distill information about the plane and then dumb it down and make a different representation of it. I think it's actually quite tricky.
Yeah, you sort of cross into the realm of game design then, which is a whole scary field in of itself. So I guess that part of our job is a little easier, that we can just stick to the real thing and we don't have to think too much about, that sort of stuff, except in Jester, which is in that area.
I think also, I mean, there's another type of limitations that would be more due to DCS capabilities. And I think the radar warning receiver is an example of that, where, I mean, we can't do anything. I mean, we are limited to whatever DCS can do. And same thing goes for the IFF system, for instance, the transponders. But I was really happy to see the other day that ED their intent is to improve the underlying systems for transponders, because that's something we could really, really make use of in the F-14 as well. So we look forward to that.
Now, there was one question from someone that wanted to know if the supersonic glove vanes will be modeled and functioning. Also, is there any chance of seeing supersonic shot cones?
So for the glove vanes, they were actually welded shut, if I'm not mistaken, fairly early on in the F-14 history. And the versions we're modeling, we have decided to go for the ones which did not have these functioning. Maybe, I guess this is a perfect area for Nick here to fill in.
I mean, we've thought about. I think I've even said this publicly, that we might do it so they'll pop out just visually if you enable it specifically. Just so you can get that visual thing going on. But I think we'll look at it and see if we want to implement the actual aerodynamic effect of having those out in supersonic flight. I guess that's something we'll discuss post-release, and we'll see. But at least the visual effect will be cool, just to for some screenshots and just see how it looks. And that's the same reason we try and implement things like the the bullet fairing on the TCS is something that we want to do as well, and these types of things, just so we can show off the Tomcat in its different configurations across its lifetime, really.
And just to be specific, I mean, the F-14B never had it. They were manufactured without it. The F-4, this is kind of my role as the Tomcat nerd. The F-14A had them, of course, from manufacture, but starting in like 83 to 84, they started pulling the hydraulic lines because they were acting up. So you'll see a mix in pictures of some of them with and without it operating. But a lot of them in the fleet, even by then, weren't working right. And then by 92, they wired all of them. So it's a relatively limited run of aircraft that really had them fully functional.
Interesting. And what about the supersonic shot cones?
That's something we want to try and get in. It's we're a little bit limited in what we can do in terms of effects of that type in the engine, because we're missing a critical component visually that we would have to use to simulate those types of things. But it is absolutely something that I would love to have in. It's almost like an iconic F-14 thing. You see it in many photos.
Right.
So it's definitely on my mind. So with some luck, we can get it in, and we can discuss with Edie how we can implement that best. So fingers crossed. Maybe not at release, but it's definitely on our minds. So it's on the list, towards a little bit towards the bottom, but we'll get there.
Now, I was thrilled to learn that Scat, or IASGACT, his name's always difficult to say. I always just call him Scat, was working with you on implementing the AIM-54 Phoenix missile from all of the simulation data that he got on it. Now, are there any other missiles he derived data on besides the Phoenix that you will be using?
No, I think he's done independent work on things like the Sparrow and so on. But right now we're not planning to use any other, we're not using custom Sparrows for one, because so many of the other planes in DCS are using the in-game ones.
Right.
So I think right now we're basically just using the Phoenix that he did for us.
I think retaining cohesiveness as much as possible with DCS as a whole is an important part of the sim. Otherwise you would get every third party with their own standard and this type of thing going on. So, and of course about the Phoenix, we're in communication with Edie about the Phoenix as well. So everybody's in sync basically. We made sure our contract was limited to the Phoenix for now.
Okay, because that was my next question. Is like, how does that work with ED? Since they have their own missile physics in the sim, they would have to incorporate your missile data into DCS. Now, were there any issues in trying to convince them to go down that route?
For now, we're having smooth sailing, and we're having a dialogue with Edie, and everything is looking good. So hopefully that will continue up until release. And I don't see any issues moving forward. And Edie is always open and approachable. So we open a dialogue as early as we can and make sure that everybody's on the same page. I think our simulation of the Phoenix will be very accurate. So its merits will be based on research and accuracy as opposed to opinion, and that always carries a lot of weight.
Exactly.
I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, the data we have matches quite well in the end with data we have of the missile flight data and so on. I think there are still some DCS limitations that we cannot overcome with the current model, things like the guidance system and the lofting and things like that. But I think overall the performance is reasonably good, and it does seem that things are moving in that direction in ED as well. So.
Yeah, and as an addendum, I guess a lot of people will be surprised at the performance of the Phoenix, and that's going to be an interesting process to see on the forums after release.
I think a lot of people might overestimate its abilities as well. I think they're going to be expecting 160-mile shots, but although capable, it's only under certain conditions, as far as I've heard.
It's definitely capable. It's just you need to use it in the right way.
Right.
Yeah, and if you go and look at all the test shots and those things which claim those maximum ranges, those are all at the best possible conditions and very high altitude and very fast closing speeds and head-on shots and so on and so forth. So it's like sort of a marketing number, really. And
obviously these missiles were used against bombers, not fighters. So
nope. I mean, it's an anti-fighter weapon. That was part of its original design spec, actually.
Really? I was also under the impression that it was like anti-bear type of missile.
I was going to say it was designed to be a Sparrow replacement, actually. I mean, if you look at the design origins of it, But the idea was that there were a couple of major limitations known with the Sparrow, and a couple of them were the fact that it was terrible against maneuvering targets because it had such low energy states, and of course you had to illuminate the whole time. So they incorporated that all into this missile, and it was actually the first missile that was ever able to hit a target pulling more than 6 Gs in testing in the early 70s. However, the issue with it is that it's big and it's heavy. So in theory, what they really wanted was something the size of the Sparrow that could do the things of the Phoenix, but it wasn't feasible back then. But they got a lot of extra range out of it, at least going with that large missile and large warhead.
And I mean, there's actually a quite useful mode. I mean, you can shoot it in within a BVR engagement, and it will go active directly, for instance, on it. It actually works quite well. It's I think one of our SMEs referred to it as a whole Mary, holy shit shot or something like that, but it works.
From this little sneak peek that I've got from Scat, he said it has a similar guidance to what you'd expect from an AIM-120.
Well, the guidance from the AIM-54C was actually plugged directly into the AIM-120A developmentally. And
I think also there's a lot of potential for us to work with ED with the Phoenix and improve the guidance logic and so on. Unfortunately, this is something we can't really directly control ourselves, but hopefully over time we can make it add to the guidance fidelity of it, basically.
So what can you tell us about what weapons will be available upon launch and which ones may need to be held off until a bit further down the road?
I mean, I guess the basics will all be there. We'll have AIM-9 Sidewinder, AIM-7 Sparrows, 3 variants of the AIM-54 from IASGACT's data. Of course, the M61A1 Vulcan gun will be there. We should have, or we do already have, working Zuni rockets, a variety of ion bombs, laser-guided bombs, and so on. So I think it will be reasonably complete at launch in that sense.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can think about in terms of weapons would be the laser-guided munitions. I mean, we're still not 100% sure we'll be able to get the Lantern to a state which we are comfortable with releasing for early access. But I think it's looking quite good. If I was a betting man, I would say it would it will be there, but we'll see.
Yeah, and even if we decide to launch without the Lantern, you can still obviously launch the laser-guided bombs and use buddy lasing or JTAC lasing, etc.
Right.
And it wouldn't be a long time before we would release the Lantern if it didn't make it into release. So it won't be a long wait for people. I guess some of the maybe more exotic things we haven't really worked on yet too much, like the TALD, for example. I guess would be one thing that we haven't looked at too much. Things like mines, those types of things. But
and interestingly, the TALD has recently been added into the base DCS game, so it might be possible to add that shortly.
Yeah. One of our main goals with the F-14 has really been to make sure that we launch in a very complete state. Not saying it's going to be perfect or anything. It's going to be far from perfect. But we're really trying to make sure that we're not missing any major components in the aircraft, because then we really get mired in the post-release process for much too long time, and that's never too good. And you know, it's not fair to customers either, to be honest. So
Yeah.
it's been a big goal for us with the F-14.
All right, so talk to me about the upcoming album titled Defender of the Fleet by METEOR. We've heard the first track last year, and it was amazing. How did all that come about, and can we assume that it will be ready on release as well?
I'm not even sure. I can't even remember how. I think I was just browsing YouTube one evening, and I came across a track that had a good fusion of that sort of hard rock metal sound together with that 80s synth sound. And I got in touch with Jorge at METEOR. He's a one-man music machine, basically. And he was super into the idea of making music for the F-14, and we essentially settled on making a whole album. So that's what we did, and the album is actually complete. I believe it's about 10 tracks at this point, with a couple of bonus tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So about 12 tracks in total. It is, well, as mentioned, it's completely done. It's been mastered and it's ready to go. It's going to be released with the aircraft, so it'll be part of the game files, and you can play it in the cockpit, which we highly recommend because it fits very well in with the airplane. I guess we'll use it in some missions and stuff like that as well. That's the goal, at least. In terms of inspiration, I think most of the tracks are directly inspired by specific tracks found in Top Gun, actually. Maybe not all, but I guess like 60 or 70% are really directly inspired from tracks from Top Gun. Not even tracks that you'd find on the OST, but just music that plays in the background somewhere, or some synth lines that you'll hear in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who grew up on Top Gun, that invokes a lot of nostalgia for me. So that was one of the goals with the album, to really invoke that feeling of F-14 80s nostalgia,
Right.
and bring it into 2018.
Now, with the Viggen, we were very happy to see you include a haunting Easter egg. Can we expect something similar in the Tomcat? Perhaps in the form of an homage to Danger Zone?
No comment?
Have you seen that glorious fishbowl in the rear seat? I mean, it's amazing for all kinds of stuff,
All right. Point taken. Say no more.
There's even a joystick to move things.
I mean, it just really brings you back to the old arcade moments,
Aha.
We probably said too much, I guess. Let's leave it there.
Right. After all is said and done, the module is finally released, and the pressure is off. Do any of you even have the time to just fly and enjoy the work that you've created? Or is it something like a song that you've heard over 1,000,000 times and wish to never hear again?
For me, it's the second part, at least. I can't speak too much for the other guys, but when you're working so long on the visuals, you do it really becomes that song you've heard 1,000,000 times. Plus, you get irked at every tiny little thing that you think you could have done a tiny little bit better, and it turns into an exercise of frustration, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to fly it way more than I already do, but every now and then I do take a step back. When the Hornet launched, everybody was having their case one recovery, videos and things on YouTube. I got into the Tomcat and did a whole bunch of landings with that. So that was awesome.
I mean, I really hope I will, after all these years, really, really use the module as well, buy the aircraft. I would say I think I will. I guess we'll see. I really must say, though, that lately I've been trying to join our testers a bit more often than I did before. And I must say, of course, I'm extremely biased, but I really feel that it's a really, really fun plane to fly at the moment.
I think we had a testing session. It was a long time ago now, and we had just implemented multi-crew, at least to a level where it was sort of usable. And I remember we had a evening testing session, all of us, and I think a couple of us couldn't sleep afterwards because it was just such a great gaming experience, basically. One of those that you really remember for a long time. And I think a lot of people will have that when they fire up the Tomcat and fly together for the first time, because it's just a completely different. We do have multi-crew modules in DCS right now, but it's not on the level of the Tomcat, just in terms of capability, not to mention perhaps quality and all these other factors that come into play.
I think the pilot Rio relation, that's just, I don't know, it just adds another dimension to multi-crew. I think it's really cool.
The day after I had finished implementing the air-to-ground CCIP and CCRP modes, I enabled the DCS unlimited ammo option, and I literally flew for probably 4 hours just bombing the shit out of everything. That was awesome.
Poor Caucasus,
I'm sure you're not going to be the only one.
And the dynamics of the airplane are just hugely fun to fly, because it's really not it's not an extremely challenging airplane, in the sense that I think a lot of people have heard things that it's dangerous or something. It's not. I mean, it definitely bites you if you do the wrong thing. But in regular flight, it's this really good combination of just depth in the flight model, and you feel like different movements and sensations, virtually, of course, that a lot of other modules don't quite have. And it sort of reinvents itself all the time, depending on speed and sweep angle and configuration. And it's really dynamic. And that makes it sort of endlessly enjoyable, even just to go out and, do BFM work or regular flights or run around the pattern. I mean, it's, I've been flying it ever since last, I think July or something like that. And it's still what I spend 95% of my time in, even though I'm testing it.
So if you had to give anyone a sort of tips as to flying the aircraft, what are some of the things you should watch out for example?
It has a ton of control authority. So its pitch rate is extremely powerful. So you do have to be a bit careful about over-G'ing the aircraft, especially if you have more than about 300 or 350 knots, which I think will be a big surprise to people, especially compared to, say, the Hornet, which really builds up G's very progressively because it has, digital flight control system. And then the other thing is that the landing dynamics, you have to get used to using the rudder in the aircraft pretty much all the time. So when you fly high angles of attack, after you get to the high teens of AOA, you really need to use the rudder exclusively to fly because you get roll reversal when you put in aileron motions and such. And then same thing in the landing pattern, has a fair bit of Dutch roll. So it's very manageable, but you have to put in decent sized rudder inputs. I think a lot of people are surprised the first time they, move the stick laterally for lineup and suddenly see that the aircraft, the nose is drifting away from where you want it to go, and then it slides over a lot more than you expected. So there's a bit of a learning curve with those things too.
Oof, I have not used rudders while flying modern aircraft in a while, so this is going to be definitely new for me. Now, can we expect any hints as to what we may expect after the Tomcat? Now, I know it's vastly too soon to ask this, but, people are curious.
Well, I guess we've been pretty open about wanting to continue our Tomcat journey. So that's something that we're looking at for sure. In terms of other aircraft, we are working on some advanced jet aircraft currently. And some of them are progressing very well. In terms of hints, I guess, just pointing to what I said earlier about us leveraging the tech we've been working on for a long time, ground radar and multi-crew and Jester AI and all these types of things. And, I guess we're very cognizant about what people want and what people like. So, don't expect anything perhaps too far out of left field, but I think people will really like what we're cooking up, if you will. Hopefully everything, not hopefully, guaranteed everything will be with, the Heatblur quality that that everybody hopefully has come to enjoy. So really looking forward to going down that route after the Tomcat.
Now, this is something that I actually don't know. Are you guys also creating your own naval stuff? Any boats, anything of that nature?
We are creating a series of the Forrestal class carriers, which is, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the CV-59 to the CV-63, right?
Yeah, 62.
62, all right. So you got the Forrestal, Ranger,
Saratoga, and Independence.
There you go. So we're going to be creating those carriers, and they are quite far into development right now. And we are also creating some other non-flyable content for the F-14 that we're going to be unveiling pretty soon. So we always try to make sure our aircraft are quite heavy in terms of content and in terms of value. So when you put down that money, you know that you're not only getting an aircraft in the highest quality standards that you can, but you also get a bunch of other stuff around it, like campaigns and units and those types of things. So you really feel good about what you're getting.
Plus, you're getting two aircraft because, it's the F-14A and B. And they're pretty similar, but there are some pretty noticeable differences in terms of how you would operate the aircraft, some system changes, things like that too.
Why did you go with the two options here? Because I would assume that people would just go with the latter instead of the A model.
I really want to fly the A. I like the A a lot.
Yeah, it's an iconic airplane. It's the A is really the iconic F-14, I would say, at least from my perspective. If you think about the F-14, the images of the VF-84 Tomcats and stuff coming up in my brain immediately. I think it was a very natural choice, and I think the challenge of flying the A will be very fun and will bring a unique part to DCS. We've got challenging aircraft to fly right now, but the A is another one to add to that mix, and it's definitely going to be quite a challenge with those engines.
Have you never dreamt about being in a flat spin heading out to sea? You kind of need the A for that, right?
And what about liveries? Because I think you guys mentioned before that the artwork is typically something that you guys do more at the end. Will you have a vast array of different options for people? I mean, I expect people are going to want to see the Jolly Ranchers and things of that nature.
Did you just say Jolly Ranchers?
It's a bit of a nickname.
I know that story from Reddit, I think. So I think we want to end up with something like, I don't know, just an extreme amount of liveries by the end of it. You know, the goal is really to try and get as many in there as we can, time permitting. Of course, the community is going to create a bunch as well. The F-14 is an aircraft that had really an incredible amount of liveries on it. Everything from the early A high-vis stuff to, you know, even the TPS gray schemes of the 90s have a lot of variation and stuff. And Nick has been instrumental in helping us actually on that front. Even the stencil positions and stuff are changing, and the no-step, you know, sprays and stuff like that. So there's just so much work that goes into creating all of those liveries. But yeah, the ideal goal is to just have as many as we possibly can.
In addition, I mean, we've promised all our SMEs that we'll include the liveries that they flew with, so that's already a whole bunch right there.
Yeah.
All right. Now, finally, we arrive at the end of this podcast. We've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else that you'd like to discuss or add that you'd like the community to know?
Well, personally, I'd just like to thank everybody for their support and their patience. It's been a long road for us and for you guys as well. Trust me when I say nobody wants this aircraft to be done and out more than we do, I think. You know, just from a personal perspective and a business perspective, it's very important for us. That said, we just are making sure that we do it justice. I think we're very much on the right path, and we're very close now. You know, we'll be working hard throughout the rest of this summer, the next coming months, and hopefully explode out pretty soon with a lot of good stuff. So really looking forward to doing that. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at how big of a leap forward the Tomcat is. It's not going to just be another DCS aircraft. I think it's going to be something very new for people to experience. On the backs of a lot of talented people at Heatblur, like Daniel and Bert and Nick here, and hopefully everybody will enjoy it.
All right, I think that will about do it for this episode. I'd like to thank all four of you for coming today and take part in this podcast. I bet that most of the community and myself can't wait to see the finished product. So I wish you all good luck in the final stretch of your development process. So until the next podcast, sayonara, and good night, everyone.